Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 15th episode of the Cultured Pull List. In this episode, we are coming to the final chapter of the Warworld Saga. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, everyone. We are your hosts, Mike and Luke.
Hey.
And this is our final part of DC's Warworld Saga. If you have not watched our part 1 and part 2 videos, I definitely suggest that, as well as our coverage of Superman and the Authority, because all those kind of go together. It's all kind of one overarching story. Yeah, in this week, we're going to do something a little bit different. Luke is going to start out, and then I'm going to cover the tail end of this. And somehow one of our issues kind of slipped through the cracks last time, so we're starting out with technically like the tail end of last week's book and then the rest of this week. So this book is, even though it's part of the Warworld Saga, the book itself is called is part of the Action Comics run, Superman Action Comics, and it's called Warworld Revolution. It is written by Philip Kennedy Johnson and Simon Spurrier. The artist is Riccardo Federici, Will Conrad, and Fico Ossio. The inkers are Riccardo Federici, Will Conrad, Brent Peoples, and Fico Ossio. The colorist is Lee Lowridge, and the letterer is Dave Sharp. And this collection was released in February 2022.
Yeah, so this is the last issue from the previous arc. Well, not the arc, but chapter, I guess is a better way to say it. And it begins with Lois Lane and John Kent are in the Fortress of Solitude, and they have, I believe her name was Thea Lowe, if I remember correctly, in like a Bacta tank, for better or worse, like a Star Wars kind of thing. And she's kind of healing, and she's having seizures, and Helix, the robot, basically says that she's having kind of withdrawals from Genesis energy, which was that tablet that Superman had. And Lois Lane's going to try to find it so she can kind of sort of have trace little bits of energy so she doesn't have like so bad withdrawals, but she can still like not overdose on it, for lack of a better term. And then back on Warworld, Superman and his revolution are in full effect. They get attacked by, I believe her name is the teacher. His name, I don't know if it's I don't know the pronouns. It's the teacher, and then OMAC, who at this point is fully turned. And the one native, I don't know if I ever found out his name, but there's one guy who's kind of been mentoring Superman for
his name is Krill-Ox.
Krill-Ox, yeah. And he basically says, if you can take that orb from the teacher, then we'll have like a chance of defeating them. And so the fight breaks out, and they keep fighting, and Superman does manage to take the orb. I don't know if it's on this panel or not. Yeah, I think it's over here. But the fight goes on for quite a bit, and and then OMAC is fighting, and then Mongul shows up, and they fight for a bit. And then, basically what it is happening is, obviously this is kind of what we found out last time, is those kids, and he's kind of inspiring them to fight. And Genesis energy is what we'll find out later in this issue is kind of one sentient being across, I think maybe even the multiverse. It's at least the one universe, and so it's kind of all connected. So like when something will happen on Warworld, it'll affect whatever's like the Genesis tablet and thought, the theologians on Earth as well with Lois. And so Lois she finds out where Clark hid the tablet, and it's with John Henry Irons, which is Natasha Steele's father. And he has like,
it's her uncle in the comics.
Okay. That's my bad. Yeah, from the TV show, that would be.
Right. Yeah, that kind of confused me too at first.
Yeah. Okay. And then so he has kind of this lab, and there's a bunch of different experiments, and he's basically like saying he's only touched like the tip of it. But yeah, basically they're talking about basically what I just said, and it kind of opens, and it doesn't really open a portal, but they can kind of see a little bit of what's happening on Warworld. And then we pick up. This is the annual issue, and it kind of it doesn't. It's more like an interlude, but I think I really do enjoy it. It's kind of like a backstory into. It's kind of okay. It kind of juxtaposes Superman's kind of backstory and his whole philosophy with Mongul and his whole backstory as well, and I think it's really interesting. So we open up on a soccer match when Clark is a child, and we find out that he used a little bit of his super breath to kind of like manipulate the soccer ball into going into the goal. And then Martha's like, "Yeah, I saw you do that. You're not supposed to do that." And he's like, "Well, I mean, the guy I cheated against was kind of an idiot anyway, so I just wanted to kind of to show him." And Martha's like, "Yeah, don't do that." Then we cut to Warworld. This is the whole issue is a flashback, and we're finding out Mongul's backstory. And he basically there was this. It wasn't the same arena, but it's a similar kind of tournament thing where they kind of weed out the weak among the Warzoons. And Mongul tries to defend another child, and that gets him and his mother banished from their like clan. And then the kid back on Earth in Smallville, the kid was not super happy about Clark cheating, so he kicks a soccer ball and it hits Martha in the head, and it turns out that she has cancer, which something we'll find out a little bit later. And then Clark is super mad about this, so he goes to the other kid's house, tries to steal his bike, but then he finds out that his dad's abusive and also like an alcoholic, and so he like passes out at the wheel on the way to the bar. He's about to drive into the highway when Clark catches it, and then the dad falls out of the truck, and Clark takes him to the hospital in Smallville, and he finds out that his mom has cancer, and she's just like being super brave, and that's kind of the whole point of this. The whole message, I guess, of this part of the story is like you need to be strong, be brave, and help other people, and that juxtaposes with Mongul, where it's basically saying people who help other people are weak, and you got to fight for yourself, and you have to manipulate other people and all that. Kind of going off of what we talked about in the previous weeks. But yeah, back on Warworld, his mother finds this like worm thing, and she's like, if we kill other animals, I don't know what the word she used, like raiders or something. There's like a clan of people that are attacking. They just kind of wander around Warworld. Anyway, she says if we kill these little animals, then they'll go after them and not us. And and then over here she's like eating some, and Mongul asks for some, and he's like, "No, you got to get your own." Basically, he goes off and he kills this dog, and he then offers it to his mother, which at this point is like, I don't know why he. I know why he did it for the story, but I feel like the choice of at this point, he should realize that offering food to another person is not their way of life. Anyway, like obviously his mom's really mad about this, and then they get attacked by the clan I was talking about, and then it flashes back to Clark. And there's actually a comment earlier in the story. Martha says something along the lines of, "If you and the other kid get into a fight, the best case scenario is that he breaks his hand punching your jaw." And that's kind of what happens here, except Clark like rolls with the punches, and he kind of falls over instead of just standing still and taking the brunt of it, because then that would hurt the kid pretty bad. And we find out that other kids are kind of making fun of him for his dad, and Clark's not super happy about that. Anyway, back to the clan. I think these panels are out of order, but basically they get attacked by this massive thing, and Mongul's mom gets pretty wounded, but Mongul's able to kill it with like a rock. And then the raiders come up, and they're like, "That's pretty cool. You can join our ranks, but you got to kill your mom first." And your mom's like, "Yeah, you should kill me to join the ranks, and then beat the next Mongul." And he's like, "Cool, I'll do it." And so he does. This particular issue ends with Martha in chemotherapy, and basically everything's going to look fine, because obviously we know she doesn't die that early on. But then the other kid shows up and he's like, "Yeah, I have cancer too." I'm like, "Oh, that's something." Then it flashes back not to the present day, obviously, but later on.
So I don't think it was that he has cancer. I think like he was sorry for hitting her in the head with the ball, so he like shaved his head too or something because he felt
Oh,
bad.
okay.
I totally thought it was cancer at first. I was like, wait a minute, what? But he had
Yeah,
hair earlier, so
sure.
I'm pretty sure it's that he
Okay.
just shaved his head. But they really aren't very clear, are
That
they?
makes a little bit more sense, but
A
still, it
little
seems
bit.
a little,
It's
yeah.
still a little weird, but
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, back in the present day, we see Superman flying over like a community center, and I think it's implied that that kid is now this adult who's helping kids play soccer, and then the final panel is just kind of him watching them play soccer. And then, I think this is the last couple panels of the issue, basically what I already went over. He kills the mom and joins their clan and all that. Anyway, back to this issue. I think it opens up with Manchester Black in the kind of being tortured by the teacher. He's sort of like trying to dissect his mind and kind of learn his power and all that. Yeah, and then they're back to Superman and the Authority. They're fighting, and he's basically in the journal entries that we talked about from last week. He's talking about just remember who he is, remember why he's fighting for Lois and John and all that. Back to the portal thing I was talking about earlier. There's a portal, and then they rescue Manchester Black. Yeah, and then this is the planet back from all the way back from the first volume of the story, where the United Planets was told not to get involved, basically because there's one guy who was working for Mongul, and basically he was told not to get involved, and he can kind of just exist peacefully without any Warworld attacking them, because if the United Planets was to help Superman, then the Warworld would wipe them out. And basically what we're finding out now is that the United Planets, they're not helping Superman, but they did build like a fleet of starships. And so Warworld and Mongul are not super happy about that. So they basically take the planet and they that's happening later, but I'll jump ahead. Basically Mongul's like, yeah, so I'll take the planet and also take all of your starships because this is just like a peace treaty and that's cool. Obviously it wasn't. He's being manipulative, but yeah, and so we're back. They're talking about Orphan, which is the weird baby thing we were talking about earlier. And I think they realize that it's like two entities that are kind of like one. And do you remember the witch's name? Like this witch over here?
The mother.
That's right, the mother. And then so they start going on about the mother's origin story, how like there was a whole planet of people being attacked by Warworld, but they decided to basically wipe themselves out because there was the mother was dormant on that planet, and they realized that like, well, if we awaken the mother, she'll kill all of us, but then at least we don't have to be part of Warworld. Mm-hmm. So they do that, and when Warworld arrives on their planet, all of them are dead except for the mother, and then Mongul like bribes her to be a part of his entourage, for lack of a better term. And then they start talking about Apollo and how he's part of the Star Forge, and then Superman mentions that he's not, he's powered by solar radiation, obviously, and he's talking about how because there's not a yellow sun on Warworld, he's not at full power, but something about the Star Forges, he's able to get some of his power back from the from those solar radiation coming off of the Star Forges that are powering Warworld. And this is kind of what I mentioned earlier about the United Planets.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, so that's why they're going back to like the underground. We kind of talked about that a little bit last week. They're sort of that's where their base is, like underground, as close enough to the Star Forges where they can kind of get a little bit of its power, but not too close because there's sort of a lot of Genesis energy, which we talked about. That's pretty dangerous stuff. And then I think I touched on this last week as well. There are all these writings on the wall which match the tablet, and basically they're still trying to decipher it, but they managed to figure out there's like a bunch of stories, And there's one story, King Arthur basically doesn't say King Arthur, but it basically spells it out. And there's one, I think it's Orpheus, where he goes to hell to save his wife. It's a Greek myth. I don't remember which one exactly.
Mhm.
But then he talks about another one, which is supposed to be Superman, but it sounds an awful lot like Moses. I'll read it for you. He's discovered by, this one sounds familiar. A family saves a child by sending him in a little ship far away. He's discovered by another family, becomes a great hero, and then finds his own people again and frees them from slavery. And I mean, looking
Yeah,
back,
yeah, that does sound a lot like Moses. Yeah,
um, it's probably not a coincidence because both of the Superman creators were very Jewish. So I mean, there's
yeah,
probably a lot of influence there. I don't know.
probably.
Um,
Yeah,
but basically, yeah, they're just learning to decipher what that means because the Warzoons were pretending to decipher it, but they obviously weren't. Um, and there's another story which is interesting. There was like before the universe, there was this being. I don't know what it's if they spell out who his name is, but there was this being
Olgrun, I think.
Olgrun, yeah, and maybe you're familiar with the new gods, but this was like he refers to it as an old god. So even like before
Mhm.
that whole thing, this being existed, and there was he basically had like Olgrun essentially there. He had great will, vision, wisdom, passion, wrath, madness, and the other gods figured out he was too powerful, so they kind of rose against him and split him up into different um, orbs, which I'm realizing now are very similar to the Infinity Stones. They're
Yeah,
legally
yeah,
different.
yeah.
But basically, he tells Superman there's one of those at basically at the core of Warworld. I don't know if he says which one specifically, but
No,
what?
later on they just refer to it as the Fire of Olgrun.
Okay,
So I don't really think they say which one it
okay,
is.
yeah, yeah. But one of those orbs is in the middle of Warworld. Um, and then the story ends with the forces of Mongol's forces finding where the revolutionaries are staying in Necropolis, and that is the end of this issue.
All right, so this next issue picks up, and we see Superman and his crew trying to figure out what Orphan is. And Superman tries talking to him, but Orphan won't say anything to anybody. But we do get these flashbacks during this, and we see that Orphan's parents were these scientists that were exploring and studying the source wall, which is kind of the wall between like the normal multiverse and the source itself, which is like the energy that makes up like everything in the DC universe or is in everything. And we see Darling, who's actually like this little like rover like robot. Its purpose is to protect the scientists basically, but there seems to be like some surge that happens at the source wall and it ends up killing Orphan's parents. But months later, Mongul and Teacher end up finding the wreckage of the ship, and they see that somehow, like the source wall energy mixed with Darling, kind of like wrapped up or like kind of merged with Orphan's parents' bodies, but also saved Orphan and merged with him. So it's like Orphan's basically like a mix of like Darling and source wall energy plus the actual fetus that was inside the scientist. So kind of interesting there. And Superman shows Orphan the orphan box that Teacher made. They got off Teacher earlier when they first captured Teacher. Apparently, Superman knows that Teacher made those orphan boxes to mimic what Orphan and um, Darling can do because of their exposure to the source wall. Oh, and those orphan boxes are what Superman and the rebels have been using to teleport. So then the next scene, we see these two kids that we've kind of seen this whole time. They've been tagging along with Superman since the arena, and Superman gives he made them these Kandorian puzzle boxes for them and shows them how they work. And there's kind of like this nice moment between them, kind of almost like a father and kids moment. But then we cut to Mongul, who was trying to have Light Ray brought back to life, but without Teacher. his remaining scientists aren't able to do anything, and Omak gets upset about this, but Mongul kind of puts him in his place and like knocks him on his ass and says, like, be grateful that I'm trying to bring Light Ray back at all. So then we cut back to Superman and the rebels. They're on their mission to rescue Enchantress, whose location Krill Ux found out. So they're able to find Enchantress, but before long, Mother shows up with a bunch of these like weird wraith things attacking them. But then Orphan apparently has crazy powers and just like blasts a bunch of them and ends up blasting Mother and pretty much defeating her, not killing her, because Superman then says, take this up with Mongul, basically sicking her on Mongul because Mongul promised her Enchantress. So Mother attacks Mongul in his throne room, but Mongul ends up making quick work of her, honestly. Just kind of rips her head in half. But then he has his scientists use the body of Mother and combine it with Light Ray's body. And they end up making this like monstrous looking thing that reminds me a lot of like Dark Flash and kind of like New 52 Reverse Flash. It's kind of cool looking, honestly. So next thing we see is one of the Phalosians explaining to Superman that the Citadel where they were hanging out in was attacked. Their base of operations was attacked, and Teacher was liberated, and they weren't able to really fight back much at all because Apollo, like this mind-controlled Apollo, Omak, a Darling without Orphan, who's able to operate on its own now, and this new dark version of Light Ray, they led the charge, and so made quick work of Superman's forces. So it's kind of crunch time. He's figuring they need to figure out a plan pretty quick. Krill Ux is convinced that they need to find this fire of Orlon, which is that power that one guy told Superman about. And Superman isn't really convinced that it's going to help them, though, and he thinks we just need to figure out a plan to stop Mongul now. But Krill Ux gets mad and says, like, you came here knowing you were weakened. Now we know this thing that can give you the power to defeat Mongul. You just need to claim it and prove yourself worthy. And, you're not going to do that. And so Superman says, you know what, you're right. You've convinced me. So he makes a plan to send Natasha and this big guy here to one of the Star Forges to hijack it, which we'll learn in a little bit what they're planning on doing. And then Krill Ux is supposed to go with Superman to find this fire, and then Midnighter is supposed to take the remaining like Authority members and hold the main defenses. So then we have this quick scene of Omak and Light Ray, who's trying to communicate with her, but is kind of hoping that she's not really in there because, seems like she's kind of far gone at this point. So then we cut to Natasha and this big guy. I forget his name, but and Orphan. Orphan went with them too, and they're at this Star Forge and they're going to try and hijack it. But then we see that Teacher is there waiting for them, and he has the Darling with him. He's controlling Darling, and so he starts attacking. So then we cut to Superman. They make it to the heart of the necropolis where the fire is supposed to be. This power is supposed to be this like power of this god that we talked about earlier. And there's this interesting scene where these two kids want to go back to Earth with Superman, and Superman says, like, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. You'll always be accepted in my family, kind of thing. It's kind of a nice scene. But then once the doors are open, we see this one guy, Byla, this guy who's been telling all the stories of Superman to the Phalosians and told Superman about that god, Olgrun. and told him he had to prove himself worthy to claim the power, all that stuff. So it turns out that this guy is actually a servant of the gods of the first world, the old gods we were talking about earlier. And he says something along the lines of like, I would gladly give you the fire of Ulgrin, but I can't. I don't have the power to do that. You have to prove yourself worthy, Superman. So then he conjures this big like worm thing that starts attacking them, and so Superman and Krillux start fighting this thing, but the worm ends up like clamping down on Krillux and his jaws. And Krillux tells Superman to leave him, but Superman refuses and ends up saving him, and then goes off to pursue the fire of Ulgrin, which, yeah, he has to like do this really cool like parkour sequence because the worm destroyed the bridge that would have taken him where he needs to go to this like citadel here. So then he finally arrives at this citadel, and there's this little blue girl waiting for him. And she says that he needs to solve this riddle and open this puzzle box to be able to get to the end, basically. But he's able to figure it out pretty easily. And then we see this big dude who's like, I guess, kind of like the final boss before you can get the fire of Ulgrin. And he starts, he's like a shadow of Ulgrin, I guess, is the idea. Obviously Ulgrin's dead, but this is kind of like part of his consciousness. So he ends up attacking Superman, saying like, yeah, you gotta, I'm not gonna let you take the, for like, it seems like they really want somebody to come and prove they're worthy, but at the same time they really don't seem to want anybody to come there. So they're really giving Superman a hard time. But Superman's still able to defeat this big dude, but kind of with like his last death throw, he tries to smash this little blue girl, and Superman screams no, and he runs and pushes her out of the way, and seemingly is going to sacrifice himself. But it turns out that she was controlling the big guy the whole time, and it was all just a big test kind of thing. He proved himself worthy by trying to save her, and she even says something like, you would risk your life, sacrifice your life for something not living. And Superman replies with something like, you seem pretty living to me. So she's like, oh, you're worthy, and gives him the fire, which I guess she kind of turns into the fire, which then turns into like this dagger type thing. So Superman takes the dagger fire power thing and goes back to the two kids and Krillux. But then when he gets back, it turns out that Krillux has been in league with Mongul the whole time. He's been this hooded figure helping Mongul, advising Mongul like this whole time we've seen throughout this story. And Mongul has the two kids at sword point. And we're kind of going to take a break here because there's a couple like small, shorter stories that this book kind of delves into. I'm not really going to spend much time on them because they divert from the main story, but they are kind of important. This one's not that important. It's just this Bila guy talking to some of the inhabitants of Warworld and explaining like the original Mongol, and it's basically like Warworld before it was like this crazy death machine type planet. It was inhabited by all these other species. It was like a normal planet, but then this one guy from the Warzone tribe found the necropolis, which landed on their planet, and this alien dude was the one controlling it. And it wasn't really clear what he wanted, but he was basically an arrogant jerk to Mongul, and who wasn't called Mongul at that point. But first Mongul gets mad, and when the alien guy turns his back, he kills him and takes his armor as his own armor. But it turns out the armor is actually the alien skin, so that's nice. But this jewel is the only thing that really survives and gets passed down for thousands of years to all the different Mongols. And you basically get the idea. He turns into a warlord, and for thousands of years, all his descendants are warlords as well. And yeah, they become evil conquerors. So that's pretty much just that. Then we cut back to Earth, where Thealo is exposed to the Genesis energy, the Genesis tablet by Lois and John Henry Irons. and Supergirl's there too, but her body is rejecting it for some reason. They're not really sure why. And then through the Genesis tablet, we kind of mentioned earlier that the Genesis energy is kind of like one consciousness. So Natasha is able to contact John Henry through this, and they start talking, and she says we need to solve this together, because she thinks that like them being able to help Thealo is kind of going to give a solution to their problem on Warworld. And then we see Amanda Waller talking to this guy who's apparently the villain Conduit, kind of a lesser known Superman villain, but she tells him to go after the Genesis tablet. She doesn't appreciate that Superman took it. So next we see this Genesis generator that John Henry and Natasha were able to create together. And Natasha comes up with the idea to make a version of it on Warworld, and she'll be able to filter the Genesis energy through one of the Star Forges and turn it into like this white sun that will give Superman his powers back. So after she pieces out, basically, Conduit happens to show up. He steals the Genesis tablet, and after a quick battle, he flies off with it. But as soon as he leaves, Lois ends up calling the rest of the Super family, and they end up confronting Conduit and beating him up. But there's no clear winner until John shows up, and he tips the tide and beats the crap out of Conduit. And Conduit asks Amanda Waller, he calls her up, and she says like, well, you failed. And he's like, yeah. And she's like, well, I don't really have the manpower to help you. So you're on your own. So he ends up grabbing the Genesis tablet, not really sure why, but I guess to either kill himself or he's hoping he can harness its power, but it ends up starting to kill him because it's just too much energy. So to save his life, John Henry Irons destroys the Genesis tablet fragment, whatever, which is kind of dumb, but he destroys it and Conduit lives, but now they have to find a new way to help Thealo. And that's where all that whole diversion kind of ends. Now we get back to the main story where all of Mongul's forces are attacking the Thealosians and the Authority in the necropolis where they've been hiding out. And this big battle breaks loose, and then we cut back to Mongul holding these kids hostage, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to kill them unless you turn over the fire to Superman. And Superman is still reeling from the revelation that Krillux is in league with Mongul. Then this kid, Osul, the young boy, he tries to attack Mongul basically, or he tries to break free, and Mongul just kind of unenthusiastically kills him, which pisses Superman off, understandably, and so he starts attacking Mongul and gives him a good old smack. Then we cut back to Natasha and Orphan. They're at the Star Forge using this. Now we know why they're there, to use this generator that she made to turn the red sun generator into a white sun generator, basically. But Darling and Teacher are gaining the upper hand, but then Orphan just lets loose with this crazy ass power and ends up just sending Teacher into another universe or something. Just totally destroys him. So there's kind of this nice reunion between Darling and Orphan. They're reunited. Then we cut back to the big battle happening between the Authority and Mongul's forces, and Midnighter is saying like, we really need to get Apollo off the board because he's the most powerful heavy hitter here. And Manchester Black says that Teacher put a bunch of implants in him, and that's why he's acting the way he is, and they need to get the implants out of him to get them back, to get him back on their side. And Midnighter says, well, good luck with that. He's got like indestructible skin. So then we cut back to Superman, and he manages to kind of beat the crap, at least temporarily, out of both Mongul and Krillux. But then instead of using the fire himself to power himself, the power of Orgron or whatever, he instead uses it on the boy who died, and this actually brings the kid back to life. So then we cut back again to the big battle, and it seems like the Justice League shows up, and they attack Apollo and pin him down, and Cyborg starts to rip his implants out, but it turns out that this is actually an illusion created by Manchester Black. But I think due to some experiments or something that teacher did on him, it seems like his illusions are like he's able to make them real, at least somewhat real. But Apollo breaks out of it pretty quick, but it still is successful in taking those implants out of him. And so now he's on their side, and he and Midnight are reunited. It's all nice and everything. But then after some quick pleading from Enchantress, Omac, who had already kind of been doubting her allegiance to Mongul at this point, fully flips back to the authorities' side, to the good side, and asks for their help to get Light Ray back, because she's obviously not herself. Then we cut again to Natasha at the Starforge. Some more reinforcements show up and fatally wound this guy. So he says, "I'll take the generator and go inside the Starforge." And so that's what he does. It ends up killing him, but it does turn the Starforge from a red sun generator to a white sun generator. Then we go back, and Superman and the fight between Superman and Mongul is still going on. Honestly, surprisingly, Superman is weakened, but he still definitely has some of his powers because he's able to go toe to toe with Mongul here. But he ends up knocking Mongul on his ass again. But Mongul uses that stone and blasts Superman with energy. And Mongul seems to think it probably killed him, but that white sun energy has repowered Superman, so he's back to his superpowered self, and he visions Mongul, and yeah, kind of has his way with him for a second, but then Krill Ux comes from behind and stabs Mongul from behind through the chest, because now he's powered by the Genesis energy that's being produced by this white sun reactor, and all the other Phalosians are powered now too. We saw this back in part 1 when Thea was exposed to the Genesis energy, and she developed these powers too. So the Rebels gain the upper hand because now they have superpowers. Light Ray sees that her side is losing, so she runs off to the Starforge to try and stop it, but Manchester Black teleports Omac to the Starforge, and he manages to get there as soon as Light Ray does, and Omac grabs Light Ray and jumps into the star generator with her, which seems to burn away the dark energy that was possessing her, but it does end up fatally wounding Omac. And then we cut back for the final time to Superman hanging with the kids. Well, not really hanging, but reeling from the battle with the kids. And Krill Ux explains that basically everything he did was to get the Fire of Ogron to defeat Mongul with it. It was all like a double cross, but he sacrificed many of his own people to do it. So Superman really can't seem to forgive him for it, which, understandable. So Krillux ends up using this orphan box to teleport away, and he says he still has other people to enact vengeance upon. But at this point, Mongul is defeated, and all the Phalosians and everyone else on Warworld are now free. So we have this cool, nice little ending thing. Well, nice for the most part. Omac's still fried, but everything else is nice and happy. Everybody's happy. Then one of these final scenes here, we go back to this guy, Theros, this leader, high regent or whatever of the United Planets, who made a deal with Mongul and betrayed everybody. And apparently he was the one that betrayed the new Phalosians and turned them over to Mongul, because Krillux ends up like doing a hologram call with them and basically tells him that he's coming after you. He's coming after him. and he's going to pay him back for, his crimes against his people. And this last panel here, we see Lois writing. She's actually seems like she's writing a letter or a journal to Clark, and talking about how they're doing their best to get along without him while he's gone, and then he ends up rushing through her office and scooping her out the window, and there's this nice scene at the end of them reuniting. So now that we've covered pretty much the entirety of the Warworld Saga, what was your take, I guess, for first on this book and then on the Warworld Saga as a whole?
I think it was a good idea. I just think it went on for too long. I don't think it needed to go on for 3 volumes. But there's definitely a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
The art goes back and forth, and that kind of bothers me a little bit. But when it's good, it's great.
Yeah.
No, I liked it. I think it just went a little too long.
Yeah. Speaking of the art, I wouldn't say I dislike any of the art, but like I would have liked to, it'd be the same. But that happens with comics. But
right.
I kind of wish it had been like the same artist and everything the whole way through. But I do agree that I think it went on too long. I feel like it took a lot of time, especially in the middle. And then once we get to the actual like climax, I feel like it sort of started to sprint, and this kind of rushed through the end. Not that it was bad, but it felt kind of like, not a whole lot happened. There's a lot of build up and then not a whole lot of actual like finale. But I did like the ending for the most part. I thought it was pretty cool. And honestly, the thing I like most about this, like, besides the fact that it's like this cool, like gladiator, almost like Planet or World War Hulk type thing, which I thought was pretty cool. And I really like the idea of Superman, like helping, a bunch of slaves pretty much. It's almost like a Spartacus story, honestly. With Superman, which I thought was pretty cool. But I think the thing that really stands out to me that I really like is the portrayal of Superman throughout this. Is they really show him as like, a really great, compassionate, moral guy throughout all of this, who's very, very kind. But then they also show like the badass warrior side of him as well. So I thought I just really enjoyed Superman's character throughout all this, and I think he was consistent without feeling boring. I don't think, like I feel like Superman's been around for so many years. There isn't a whole lot of room for that much character development without being really drastic with it. But I thought that I thought they made him interesting while still being like still being Superman. I think that there was one thing that I kind of didn't like. There is one, like, that quick story with they reveal, like, well, not they reveal, but Amanda Waller sends in that guy to get the Genesis fragment. From Steel. I think his name is Conduit. Yeah, he goes after the Genesis fragment, and in the end, like, he fails, but he takes the Genesis fragment and like to kill himself, basically, I think is the idea, because Amanda Waller won't send him any help. And like they need the Genesis fragment to help Fowler, or whatever her name is. But Steel just straight up like destroys the Genesis fragment to save this Conduit dude. And like they basically end it with like, well, like, Steel, you just destroyed the Genesis fragment. We need that to help her. And he's like, yeah, I know, but like, he would have died. So, oh well, we'll find another way. And it's just kind of like, I feel like it's really lame writing. I really don't like it when comics kind of address like these moral dilemmas by just like, we'll always take the idealistic approach and we'll just pull something out of our ass in the end, to be able to like, stick to our ideals in this really like, almost legalistic way. And then we just like in the very end, we just find a solution. And I looked into it, like, they don't say in this issue or in this story, this book, but I looked into it, and apparently like Fowler just kind of like, heals herself. Like there is no real explanation. It's sort of like, oh
Interesting.
no, she's fine.
Yeah,
You know,
she's
so
fine.
it's kind of like I feel like that's even like worse. You know,
Yeah,
they don't
yeah.
even find anything. It just all works out in the end. You know, that's like one of the only
Mhm.
things I really thought was really dumb in the
Right,
writing.
right.
But yeah, overall, yeah, I really enjoyed this.
Mhm, mhm.
I think the authority definitely grew on me throughout this.
Yeah.
I think the only ones I was really like didn't really care about that much were like OMAC and Light Ray.
Mhm.
And there is kind of more development, especially with OMAC by the end. But like, they're still my least favorites probably. But um, yeah, I really liked Midnighter's role in all this. I thought
Yeah.
it was pretty cool, where he's kind of leading his own revolution, and he and Superman are kind of at odds in a lot of ways, but they're still like
Mhm, mhm.
seeming like the kind of the main leaders of this revolution, which was pretty cool.
Right.
So yeah, that is the Warworld Saga. Any other thoughts on it?
No, we covered it pretty much.
All right. Well, it is time for our weekly segment, our cultured picks. What
Mhm,
did you have
mhm.
this week, Luke?
This week I picked John Kent Superman #3. Yeah, this he goes to, I believe it's Earth 43. I'm not for sure, but it's the Injustice world.
Right.
And he's kind of guided around by that version of Superman. And at first,
Hmm.
he thinks it's all good because they kind of have world peace and all that. But then he realizes that it's not really world
Yeah.
peace. Everyone's just kind of scared of Superman, so they're all kind of hiding.
Hmm.
Um,
So
he
I'm
does.
assuming this is before like the climax of the game and everything, where like he gets defeated and everything.
It doesn't say. I'm
It
not
doesn't really
sure.
say. Okay.
Yeah, because Damian, I guess technically he's Nightwing, but at this version they just call him Robin, which is weird.
Huh.
And then Batman are also in it briefly as well, and they're
Okay.
seen fighting. So I haven't read all of Injustice, so I'm not sure
Hmm.
where this would fit in to that.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, by the end, John realizes that this is not actually
Yeah.
what he first thought it was. And yeah, I really like it. I really
Interesting.
like this story. I wish it was more than just 6-issue miniseries, but I
Yeah.
really like it.
Yeah, I've been collecting it too, and I've been really enjoying it. I really liked
Mhm.
last issue when,
Yeah,
when the Injustice Superman shows up and just like kills Ultraman
yeah,
out of nowhere, and then he just like brutalizes him, and then he's like, "Hi, I'm Superman. How's it going?" You
yeah,
know,
exactly.
I thought that was really funny.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Kind of just shows how kind of like uh, almost kind of Homelander-ish, like I kind of hate to
Mm,
make that comparison because like everybody's making it now, but
right.
kind of like unhinged, like
Yeah.
like totally psychopathic, pretty much, where you just
Mhm.
like no, yeah. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Yes. So my pick is Lazarus Planet Omega.
Mm,
This is another one shot like the first one, Lazarus Planet Alpha, and the interesting thing about this whole like little crossover event thing is Alpha and Omega are both one shots that
mhm,
kind
mhm.
of like tell you the whole overarching story. But there are several like offshoot mini
Yeah.
series that go like hand in hand with it, but you really only need to collect Alpha and Omega to really get the gist of the story. But like, I wouldn't say it's like amazing, but they are pretty interesting. And the cool thing about this issue in particular, there are a few cool things, but one of them is some weird magic stuff happens, and the main bad guy, like the demon, like King, like uh Demon Bull or something like that. Um, while a lot of the DC heroes are fighting him, their powers randomly get scrambled. So
Mm.
like Flash gets like Superman strength for a second,
Oh.
Damian gets heat vision,
Mm,
stuff like that. It's kind of, and I think yeah, Superman gets Martian Manhunter's telepathy, and it's like overwhelming him. So
mm,
I thought that was kind of cool. There's this other part where they have all of the like DC magic users
mhm.
like teaming up together to take on the main bad guy. That scene was very cool, and it showed
Yeah.
how powerful Spectre is, because he ends up just
Oh.
kind of like he lands the final blow, but he more just kind of like KOs him, and like one like he just kind of like grows big and just like
Yeah.
zaps him away. It just kind of shows how OP
Mhm, mhm.
Spectre is. And the last little thing I thought was interesting was during this whole storyline, Superman gets possessed by this demon who is the main bad guy's dad, I believe. His father, and it was actually his adopted father, but it's not really worth getting into.
Yeah.
And they end up defeating the bad guys, yada yada, and it seems like everything's back to normal. But at the very end, they kind of hint that Batman's still possessed by this demon. So I'm not really sure if they're going to if they're going to explore that more in like future Batman comics or something. But I found that kind of interesting, and it'd be interesting to see if they go anywhere with it in future comics. But yeah, that is this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. If you would like to support us, check us out on patreon.com/theculturednerd. And if you would like to support me and Luke specifically in our show, look for the Cultured Pull List tier. Thank you so much to all of our current Patreon supporters. We have been your hosts, Michael and Luke. Our logo was designed by Jose Navarro. The intro was designed by myself. Thank you again for joining us. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. If you would like to check out The Cultured Nerd on social media, you can scan the QR code on the bottom left. And if you would like to check out Casual Experts, which is me and Luke's brand, we have our own podcast and YouTube channel, social media, all that stuff. You can scan the QR code on the bottom right. Until next time, everyone.